Have you ever wondered what it takes for a war movie to be so disappointing that theaters quietly pull it off the schedule? Some films collapse under their own hype, others spark reactions their creators never expected. In the middle of all that chaos, a few titles turn their premieres into cautionary tales. And right when you think you've seen the worst examples of cinematic misfire, there's one story in this list that still manages to surprise. Let us begin. Number 15. Alexander 2004. Big, bold, and determined to rewrite ancient history with dramatic flair, Alexander was supposed to be a sweeping epic filled with energy and emotion. Instead, it became one of the most talked-about disappointments of its era. Critics weren't just unimpressed. They were baffled by the uneven tone, wandering scenes, and confusing character motivations. In Greece, the backlash grew louder with each preview as groups argued the film took too many liberties, painting its hero with traits that didn't match the legends students grew up reading. Audiences expected a clear journey of a young ruler shaping the world. What they got was a slow, inconsistent story full of sudden jumps in mood. The response became so heated that some theaters quietly withdrew the movie altogether, hoping to dodge the rising noise around it. Even regions in the Middle East pushed back against how certain characters were shown. The production had enormous ambition, but ambition alone couldn't save it. In the end, the scale of the film looked impressive, while the storytelling felt strangely hollow. Today, Alexander is remembered less for its grand sets and more for how quickly its theatrical run collapsed. It is a reminder that even the biggest budgets can fall flat when the emotional core is missing. Number 14. The Great Raid, 2005. The Great Raid had all the elements of a memorable war drama. It told the story of a rescue mission filled with bravery, planning, and real-life stakes. But when the movie finally arrived in theaters, something odd happened. The audience didn't show up. Reviews described it as slow, strangely distant, and missing the spark that makes true story films connect with viewers. Critics appreciated the effort to bring history to the screen, yet many felt the movie was too restrained to build the tension it needed. Within days of its release, theaters around the country began reducing showtimes or removing it entirely. Industry insiders later explained that the film opened during a crowded season and simply couldn't keep up. Some theaters reported such small attendance that screenings were nearly empty. Others removed it early to make room for new releases. Despite its noble intentions, the movie faded with barely a whisper. Years later, many people who watch it at home call it a solid but quiet film that never found the pulse of its story. It wasn't the worst production of its decade, but its theatrical journey shows how a release can disappear when timing, projection, and energy fall out of sync. Number 13. Casualties of War, 1989. Directed by Brian De Palma, Casualties of War was meant to highlight the emotional and moral turmoil that soldiers face in extreme situations. The film carried the weight of a serious message and featured talented actors committed to delivering intense performances. But the tone was so heavy and the subject matter so intense that several regions in Asia withdrew the movie from cinemas soon after release. Protests emerged, arguing that its portrayal of certain nationalities could increase anger or misunderstandings. Some territories simply refused to show it, believing the theme would stir up disputes during a sensitive time. Others screened it briefly before quietly pulling it to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Even in the United States, large chains hesitated to feature it broadly, concerned that the film's emotional heaviness might push audiences away. The movie does have supporters who admire its deep character work and the dedication of its cast. However, the biggest issue was balance. The film didn't allow viewers enough space to breathe between its heavy scenes. The emotional weight became overwhelming for many. Its theater run became an example of how a serious message can struggle when the audience isn't prepared for the level of intensity the film brings. Number 12. The Painted Bird, 2019. Few modern films have created the level of conversation sparked by The Painted Bird. Shot in black and white with striking visuals, it tells the story of a young boy traveling through Eastern Europe during a turbulent era. Despite being beautifully crafted, the film was so emotionally intense that viewers walked out during festival premieres. Some screenings saw dozens of people leaving within the first hour, not because the film was graphic in a forbidden sense, but because the atmosphere was relentlessly heavy. Festival organizers reported mixed reactions. Critics praised the artistry while general audiences struggled with the bleak tone. Several international festivals removed the movie from later screenings to avoid further walkouts. Regular theaters in some countries followed suit, deciding the film was simply too weighty for a wide release. Supporters call it one of the boldest war-era stories of its decade, but even they admit that the pacing and emotional strain make it tough to watch. The Painted Bird shows what happens when artistic ambition and audience tolerance collide. Sometimes a film can be powerful, meaningful, and still too intense for a typical theatrical run. Number 11. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. One of the earliest large-scale American war-era films, The Birth of a Nation shaped the future of historical cinema while causing some of the biggest controversies of its time. Early audiences were stunned by its length, sweeping shots, and dramatic battles. But just as quickly, the backlash began. Protests erupted across several cities, arguing that the film's depictions were deeply harmful and could lead to real-world tensions. City officials in multiple regions responded by canceling screenings, and some theaters pulled the movie after only a few days. In several states, special committees held meetings to decide if the film should be shown at all. Many concluded it carried the risk of stirring divisions among the public. Because of this, screenings were either heavily restricted or stopped completely. The film's reputation became tied to the push and pull between artistic ambition and public responsibility. The Birth of a Nation remains a complicated piece of cinema history, technically groundbreaking yet socially criticized from the moment it appeared. Its removal from theaters shows that even in the early days of filmmaking, public pressure had the power to close the curtains on a movie long before its creators expected. Number 10. Capo, 1960. Capo tried to balance emotional storytelling with a grim setting, aiming for a dramatic look at survival during harsh wartime conditions. Directed by Gillo Pontecorvo, the film followed a young girl navigating a detention camp. While some critics acknowledged its ambition, others felt the approach was too stylized for such sensitive subject matter. As the film traveled across Europe, protests began to appear. Many argued that certain scenes crossed the line into sensationalism, softening moments that needed careful handling. Several theaters withdrew the movie shortly after its debut. Committees in France, Belgium, and parts of Eastern Europe reviewed the film and concluded that its tone did not match the gravity of its setting. In some cities, screenings were halted mid-run due to the rising backlash. Capo became a cautionary tale of how a filmmaker's style, even with good intentions, may clash with the expectations of audiences who lived closer to the history being shown. Over time, Capo would be remembered more for the debate surrounding it rather than the film itself. It shows that presentation matters just as much as message. When tone, framing, and history collide, even a well-crafted movie can find itself pushed out of theaters. Number 9. Battle for Haditha, 2007. When director Nick Broomfield released Battle for Haditha, he aimed to present a balanced narrative about a real incident during the Iraq conflict. Shot documentary style with naturalistic performances, the film tried to capture every side of the tragedy. But the moment the trailer dropped, the controversy arrived. Families involved in the real event expressed discomfort. Some U.S. distributors refused to touch it, worried it would reopen wounds or cause disputes between communities. In America, screenings were extremely limited, with several theaters removing the movie early after receiving a wave of complaints. Internationally, the response was similar. Some regions pulled it from schedules altogether, arguing that it depicted real people too soon after the event. Even critics who praised its realism admitted it was a difficult watch and emotionally overwhelming. Today, Battle for Haditha is viewed more as a bold experiment than a mainstream success. It aimed for honesty but struck nerves that theatrical audiences were not prepared to confront. Its withdrawal from several markets proved that timing can matter just as much as storytelling. Sometimes a film arrives before the world is ready to watch it. Number 8. Stop Loss, 2008. Stop Loss tried to tackle the emotional and personal side of modern war. With a young cast and a story centered on return-home struggles, the film expected to connect with a younger audience. Instead, it received mixed reactions from the moment it premiered. Many viewers felt the movie tried to juggle too many tones at once. It wanted to be emotional, energetic, serious, and uplifting, but the blend never quite balanced. Controversy grew in military towns across the United States, where some theaters pulled the movie from schedules shortly after release. Reports surfaced that certain regions found the movie's portrayal of military procedures misleading. Overseas, several Middle Eastern regions pulled the movie from early screenings, citing concerns about how certain scenes might be interpreted. Stop Loss is not a poorly crafted film, but it struggled with consistency. Its strongest moments were emotional and honest, while other scenes felt too stylized for the grounded story it wanted to tell. As a result, its theatrical run became shorter than expected. Over time, more viewers discovered it through home viewing and appreciated it as a heartfelt attempt that simply arrived in a tough era for war-based stories. Number 7. Redacted, 2007. Brian De Palma's Redacted set out to challenge the way audiences view war through media. Shot using a mix of digital footage, staged recordings, and found footage techniques, it aimed for a raw, unsettling authenticity. But the moment the film was announced, controversy surrounded it. Early screenings drew strong reactions. Some argued it pushed too far into uncomfortable territory, while others believed it highlighted issues that needed attention. Several U.S. theaters removed the film shortly after opening weekend due to heightened tension and public pushback. A few cities received requests from community groups to limit or cancel showings. Internationally, screenings were pulled in multiple regions across the Middle East, where the film's tone and focus were considered inappropriate for public exhibition. Despite the reaction, some critics admired Redacted for its courage and experimental style. But the film lacked the emotional grounding needed to connect with mainstream viewers. Instead, it felt like a collage of difficult moments without a character to hold on to. That is what ultimately hurt it. Redacted became known less for its filmmaking and more for how quickly theaters backed away from showing it. Number 6. The Green Berets, 1968. John Wayne wanted the Green Berets to deliver a patriotic story during a time when public opinion was anything but unified. Released in the late 1960s, the movie aimed to present a clear, heroic view of the conflict. But audiences and critics felt the film was out of touch with what the nation was experiencing. Reviewers called it overly simplified, and some argued it glossed over the emotional depth that war stories require. The tone clashed with the shifting mood of society. Protests appeared outside theaters in major cities. Some locations faced enough pressure that they withdrew the film early just to prevent disruptions. Other theaters reported heated discussions in lobbies, leading managers to quietly shorten the run. Internationally, several markets refused to screen it due to concerns about political interpretation. Despite the controversy, the movie did gain a loyal group of supporters who appreciated its straightforward approach. But its theatrical journey remains one of the most turbulent for a war film of its era. The Green Berets became a rare case where public mood overpowered studio marketing. It shows what happens when a movie arrives at a moment when the world isn't ready to see the story it wants to tell. Number 5. The Big Red One, 1980. The Big Red One had everything going for it. A respected director, a talented cast, and a story based on real wartime memories. But the version that reached theaters was not the version that was filmed. The studio cut nearly half of the original footage, shaving down emotional arcs, character depth, and large sections of the story. What remained felt fragmented, like pieces of a larger picture that never fully appeared. Critics were confused by the sudden jumps in tone, and audiences struggled to form a connection with characters who barely had time to develop. As word spread that the studio had drastically shortened the film, interest dropped. Several theaters shortened its run or removed it early, believing the movie lacked the impact needed for long-term screens. It wasn't exactly pulled due to controversy, but because the edited version simply didn't land with audiences. The pacing felt off and the emotional beats were too rushed. Years later, a restored reconstruction cut revealed the depth that had been lost. Viewers suddenly understood the director's original intention and saw how the story was meant to feel. The Big Red One became a film respected in hindsight, but its early removal from theaters remains one of the clearest examples of how editing choices can break even the most heartfelt war story. Number 4. Inchon, 1981. Inchon is widely known as one of the most ambitious missteps in Hollywood history. Funded by the Unification Church and directed by Terrence Young, the film set out to recreate a major Korean War battle with sweeping scope. On paper, the project looked enormous. In reality, the production was tangled in delays, rewrites, and budget explosions. By the time Inchon reached theaters, critics had already heard whispers about trouble behind the scenes. The movie premiered to overwhelmingly negative reviews. Audiences found the pacing uneven, and the story struggled to balance personal drama with large-scale action. The dialogue felt stiff, and many felt the movie lacked the heart needed to make its message resonate. Within days, theaters across the United States began pulling the film due to extremely low attendance. Some theaters reported screenings with fewer than 10 people. International markets reacted similarly. Inchon barely lasted long enough to make an impression. Despite its huge budget, it vanished from theaters faster than almost any war epic of its era. Over time, Inchon became a symbol of costly ambition without emotional grounding. It showed that scale alone can carry a movie when storytelling falls flat. Number 3. A Serbian Film, 2010. Although not a traditional battlefield film, A Serbian Film is a war-era trauma story that examined the aftermath of conflict. From the moment it was announced, the movie created intense reactions. Even in edited form, the film's themes were considered far too heavy for general audiences. Festival screenings led to immediate walkouts, and several festival organizers removed it from their schedules after audience complaints. In multiple countries, theaters pulled the film within days of release due to overwhelming pushback. Some regions refused to show it at all, arguing that its emotional weight was unsuitable for public exhibition. Even in places where it technically remained available, screenings were nearly empty as word spread that the movie was too bleak for a regular theatrical experience. Critics were split. Some considered it bold and uncompromising, while others believed it pushed too far into emotional darkness without giving viewers any relief. For most audiences, the tone was simply too overwhelming. A Serbian Film became one of the most widely withdrawn releases of its decade. Despite its notoriety, the film is often discussed today not for its artistic choices but for the global debate it sparked. It stands as an example of how trauma-centered stories can clash with theatrical expectations even when technically well-crafted. Number 2. The War Zone, 1999. The War Zone approached trauma from a psychological angle, focusing on a family unraveling in the shadow of post-war gloom. Directed by Tim Roth, the film's performances were strong and the cinematography captured a cold, isolating world, but the tone was incredibly heavy. Early audiences found it emotionally draining, and many critics warned that its intensity made it difficult to sit through. Even those who praised the acting admitted that it was one of the toughest films of its year. Several theaters pulled the movie shortly after release due to low attendance. Others explained that the emotional heaviness was driving viewers away. In some regions, theaters didn't screen it at all, worried that the subject matter would cause discomfort or confusion among general audiences. What was meant to be a deep, reflective story became known for its overwhelming weight. Over time, The War Zone gained appreciation among film enthusiasts who value raw character studies, but its theatrical life remains a reminder that not every emotionally powerful film works on the big screen. Sometimes a story is simply too intense, too focused on pain, and too stripped of relief to attract audiences looking for balance. Number 1. The Deer Hunter, 1978. The Deer Hunter is widely considered one of the defining war dramas of its generation. With powerful performances, a sweeping narrative, and an unflinching look at the emotional toll of conflict, it made an enormous impact on world cinema. But behind its awards and praise, the film also faced real pushback in several regions. In Thailand, theaters pulled the movie shortly after release, arguing that certain scenes painted an inaccurate picture of the conflict and could create public tension. The government expressed concern that the story might influence how audiences viewed historical events, and the film was quickly removed from schedules. Elsewhere in Asia, distributors hesitated to show it at all, worried about how viewers might react to the intensity of the middle act. Even in countries where it remained in theaters, debates formed around whether the film's dramatic choices blurred the line between storytelling and actual history. The emotional weight of the narrative, especially its focus on trauma and loss, left some audiences shaken in ways they did not expect. Over time, The Deer Hunter became both a masterpiece and a conversation starter. Admirers view it as a bold portrayal of personal suffering in wartime. Critics focus on the choices that sparked international backlash. Its removal from theaters in multiple regions shows that even a celebrated classic can face resistance when its storytelling hits deeper than expected. War movies can inspire, educate, or shake us in ways we don't expect. But sometimes they cross a line where audiences simply aren't ready for the weight they bring. Whether it's uneven pacing, overwhelming emotion, or controversial storytelling, each of these films shows how quickly a theatrical run can collapse when the tone doesn't match the moment. If you've seen any of these movies or have your own list of films that vanish too fast, share your thoughts. Remember to like, subscribe, and join the conversation. What other hidden stories should we uncover next?